You lead your own effort and work. Maybe you lead teams too, or an organization. So here's the question. What is your foundational philosophy for leading? Is it defined? I ask this because you're about to hear a truly great leadership philosophy by one of the greatest leaders ever to live. Really? Yes. Dr. Brad Parkinson is the father of GPS. He led 5 huge technical teams to create the navigation system that you and I drive around with every day called GPS. Bold Encounters shares the Good Doctor's previous interview with me, re-edited, but still analog phone audio. But it sounds okay, so don't worry. Enjoy this once, and then listen to it again and pick out every single lesson. You will be so grateful. His ideas also prove connections for a series we're going to publish this year. During the first part of our interview together, Dr. Parkinson and I explored the origin story. I was curious about a gentleman I had Googled and found named Yvonne Getting and his role very early in conceptualizing this. And we talked about the difference between him taking it over and his leadership and what had happened before. So this is a little part of the origin story of the GPS project.
We came around, and by the time he died, we were friends again. He was the head of the Aerospace Corporation, so he had a direct line, and he didn't hesitate to use that, and that was fine. And so I went into Lieutenant General I had worked for, who also had been a program manager on a complex program. Incidentally, very few generals have that as an attribute, but I was very fortunate because he was tougher than hell, but he, in dealing with me, he in essence said, go do it. And let me know what I can do to help you. And I said, I'll tell you what you can do. I know some very, very good people in this Air Force, some blue suit Air Force people with masters and PhDs in engineering, and by name, and I would like to be able to come to you and get you to tweak the personnel system and get them sent to me. And he did that.
I asked Dr. Brad Parkinson to set aside his modesty, and I really wanted to know his perspective on the depth and richness of his experience to be able to be selected for this position.
I was part of a group that had been trained at MIT, trained at Stanford with my master's and PhD. I had in-depth technical knowledge on virtually any subject having to do with spacecraft, having to do with guidance, navigation, control theory, you name it. It was periodic, it was two-dimensional, you had to observe it for a long time, it wasn't instantaneous la-di-da. And there was a general feeling, and a particular feeling, that there ought to be a better way to do that. And Yvonne Getting, here's where Yvonne comes in. Yvonne Getting, as head of the Aerospace Corporation, a technical arm of the Air Force really, but an independent company, felt there had to be a better way, and he pushed on the Air Force, and eventually, in 1964, there was a study that was sponsored by the Air Force, with Air Force involvement, done by 2 of the aerospace engineers, Woodford and Nakamura, and they uncovered 12 ways that you could use satellites to navigate. And of course, there was a variety of costs and capabilities and all this. Well, having looked at this, they concluded that it would be worthwhile to try to do some kind of a test demonstration because they weren't getting anyone's attention. And the net result is the program had floundered and it wasn't going anywhere. It had the name was 621B for military purposes. And I was a young colonel at the Los Angeles Air Force Station running an entirely different program. I had $100 million I got to spend any way I wanted every year. And I had just arrived and was just getting into this, and a brigadier general who knew me called the attention of the 3-star running this whole operation, running my program and a whole bunch of other programs. It called me to his attention because he was trying to get this 621B program going, and it turned out.
As you listen, I just want to let you know that there's more we're trying to help you with. valuable benefits we've invested in for members of our Bold Encounters Club. We've also created a way for you to just see if these advantages help you. Go to boldencounters.tv and join, and you'll get a free month's access to experience premium guidance, tools, and the care that we've invested in this work. At boldencounters.tv, you can also give club access to someone else you think may want more meaning or need more money in their life's work. Stay with us today, and at the end, you'll hear all about these great benefits.
My background was I had always loved maps. I had 2 years of navigation, formal navigation at the U.S. Naval Academy. I had taught space mechanics at the Air Force Academy. I had taught orbital dynamics to the astronauts at the test pilot school. I had tested inertial guidance systems. The point was not to brag on my background, except to say there was this marvelous coincidence. My PhD was on a navigation device, and so I had all this background that was just a beautiful fit, except the program was dead. It was not going anywhere. And this general brought me into his office one-on-one and said, well, I think you've heard about this program, and I'm thinking about moving you over there. What do you have to say about that? The conversation went on a little longer than that, but I said, General, if you send me over there, am I in charge? And he looked at me for a minute. He did not expect that reaction. And he says, well, I can't promise that. Those decisions are made even above me. And I said, well, if you can't promise me that I'm going to be in charge, I don't volunteer. Wow. And he was this curmudgeon I was mentioning earlier. And I think I got about 10 feet out of his office, and he called the personnel department and said, transfer him. I made it very clear to him what my expectations were. And so it was fair for him to give me his expectations. And his expectations were I was going to somehow, this was in November of 1972, and I was somehow going to make this thing happen. And I went down, and they had a little office of, 10 officers or something like that, maybe yet less. And they were embarked on some testing that looked pretty good and promising, but they weren't getting any traction. To make a long story short, after getting beat up a lot, failing on my first try in late August, I called a meeting in early September, and I did it away from the Pentagon because I wanted fresh ideas. And I used an integrated product team of the very best guys, and I'd already started to hire some of those. It didn't have to be any gals. I was open to it, but there weren't any. And we came out with a new proposal by the first week in September, and I started getting beat up. I'd go to the Pentagon as a matter of fact, twice a week in some cases from L.A., and explaining what this was, what it would do, why we thought we could do it, what the vulnerabilities were, what the payoffs were, all that. And in early December, I think it was like the 13th, 17th of December, something like that, of 73, the big Acquisition Review Council, this is the real decision makers in the Pentagon, I put on a 1-hour briefing, and at the end of it, they said, thumbs up. We're gonna buy a demonstration program from you. Well, that was when it got serious, because now I had to convert all these view graphs into a program. And so that was how it got started. Mel Birnbaum, Don Henderson, Steve Gilbert, Walt Melton, those were the Dick Schwartz. Have to get my poor addled brain here agitating. But let me make another suggestion. Yeah. And if you go online, I was very flattered. Stanford named me a what do they call it? An engineering hero, which I don't know how they came up with that name. But they've only, I guess, had about a dozen engineering heroes in the history of Stanford. So they named me as one. And that lecture is online. And the reason I am answering you this way is when I get a chance to talk about the history, I inevitably pull out pictures of all these heroes, the top level heroes. And so if you go online to Stanford, and I suspect that lecture is still on, you can watch and see not only the audio-visual version of the history, but you're going to see a whole bunch of pictures of the heroes, and I explain why these were heroes, why they were part of this integrated team, and essential parts, really. It's amazing how many people end up essential. There's probably 20 people, if they screwed up badly, we'd have had trouble. And maybe even more. It depends on how you define that. But
after we got into the origin story a little bit, I wanted to start talking about the people that were involved with him during this process and the importance of people in this process. Another thing you're going to notice is that he lists a couple of speeches that I actually obviously watched during the research part of this project. And I am going to put those in the notes, a list of those speeches. They're amazing. They're a little technical for sure. It's Stanford and Google, but he's also talking about some of the path-related leadership, some of the things on a path with milestones, and he even draws an analogy in one of the speeches between a pathway in the sky where aircraft go through waypoints that are like milestones in the air, and they go through those donuts, but each has its own purpose in time and in scope. Very similar to leadership over the long run. Listen to what he says about all this.
You know, without good people, I don't care what you're trying to do, it gets tough. And in my opinion, the key thing, I did a couple things they're very right. And one was, I recognized I had to surround myself with very good people because I was running 5 programs. It wasn't one program. It was a spacecraft program. It was a ground control program. It was building the user receivers, of which we built 10 different kinds. It was a massive test program. And finally, it was the coordination of all 4 of those, the system engineering and interface control. And those 5 had to all play together like a great symphony. And I went to great lengths to ensure that, by and large, the people running those 5 pieces were compatible, were harmonious, were team players, and were trying to get the job done. And we're not on an ego trip. Early on, I had inherited some people from a previous study program, and I think of the half a dozen or it was probably a dozen. My guess only 2 survived in terms of my management style. The others, you know, we're going to have to move fast here, folks, and you're not the right people. And I just eased them out. I didn't stand them up and shoot them. In my opinion, one of the big keys is surround yourself with people who are bright enough, understand what they're going to do, and are goal-oriented.
Dr. Parkinson is a serious leader. You can hear it as you listen to him. However, I loved a little sentence that he said in this last part. He talked about easing people that were not the right people that he inherited in the organization, even some that he hired, easing them out to a better place for them and to improve the project for the team and for humanity in the military. What I thought of when I heard him talk about this with me and I shared with him was an experience I had. I was asked to lead a small company. It was a turnaround situation. In the first week and even second week again, we had to lay some people off. We had to downsize from about 300 people total, and we had to do some very painful cuts, and some of them were with the founders' kids and brothers and sisters. It was very uncomfortable, awkward, as those things always are on either side. And if I thought of an HR person I worked, Mary Michelle Scott. She's now runs companies, but back then she was an HR leader, and I was expecting the typical, this is how you say things best, and all the things that you usually hear in those uncomfortable situations as a CEO. And instead, what I got from her was an amazing performance at the toughest time of an HR person's life. And what I saw before I had to have those difficult conversations, I saw her arrange interviews, not outplacement opportunities, not paying for companies that would help people transition. She went out to her network, which is vast, and she got interviews, great interviews for people, not only professionals that we had to let go, but some of the warehouse people. And she got a lot of people great interviews. And it was so much easier for me, but it was still very difficult for me. The great benefit there clearly was the families of those people that I had just met and were very angry in some cases. And I am just so grateful for compassionate leaders in the workplace. Compassion does not mean you don't get good results. Compassion is what we're here for. And I'll never forget that example. And I'm grateful that it is included in Dr. Parkinson's example. Now, I asked the obvious question next, which is, well, what makes a great talent in your mind? And he lists a few things. Try to pick those out. Those few things are essential. He goes by them quick, so try to list when he starts to list.
Candidly, I'm appalled. They have people who claim to be managers who don't even have any technical background at all. In my opinion, if you don't know the rudiments of your business, you're not well qualified to run it. And I'm sorry, that's my bias. And the reason is, if it's a routine thing, if it's, I don't know, punching out plastic chairs or something, yeah, you can probably get by with people who don't understand it. They'll figure it out after a while. But if you're doing one-of-a-kind new things, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Then I followed up and said, just for you, what were the very first early signs that you knew you had the wrong people?
I have loaded them with decisions they're not capable of doing well. Then we have a conversation, and I'll step in and either push them to make a decision or swap them out or whatever. But the way GPS was run was a very cooperative management style, except at times I was a dictator. Other times I was very collaborative. It depended on my instincts as to whether the person I was dealing with could I had to tell them step by step, or could I tell them, here's the goal in this general area, go to it and let me know what I can do to help you.
Then I wanted to graduate and ask him about some of the leaders and ask him what he thought made a great leader.
To me, a leader, there isn't a single style. Like, a good leader modulates what he does.
I knew there's more, so I said, tell me another essential characteristic of a great leader.
The second issue that I think is essential, and it's invisible, is the really good program manager has a nose for trouble.
Oh, you got to hear this next part carefully. He gives a dissertation, an amazing treatise on early detection and pivoting that is priceless. Take a listen to this.
He figures out, we got high risk here. I want to take out an insurance policy. We're going to have a parallel path, or I want that thing double tested. I want to dig into that test, and I want to be certain that when that satellite goes up, it's one strike and you're out. If the satellite doesn't work on orbit, you don't get to pull it back with a screwdriver. So I think that second trait, which is very difficult to describe, the trait that a good program manager can smell the trouble and takes actions long before it becomes a problem. As a result, you see a program that goes through. I mean, we launched our first satellite in 42 months from a dead start, and the latest effort by the Air Force has taken 12 years. We'd never even seen a navigation satellite of this type. And so the point is, it was without a nose for trouble. What you keep seeing is they stumble onto problems that somehow someone should have smelled. But you can say, well, if you're just going by the book, and no one told you to smell that. Well, that's true. But I think there is an intuitive, instinctive assessment that only comes with a program manager who really understands what he's about. And that meant that I had to not be quite as good as everyone under me. I never claimed that. In some cases, I probably was, but for the most part, no. What I did claim was I could dig in and figure out whether we had a problem. And in some cases, it was brutal, but they knew it wasn't personal. But we'd get in a meeting, and I'd start boring down, and I'd say, okay, you don't have a good answer here. I want to have an answer by tomorrow.
I was just wondering, on a big, complicated project like this, what were the most common problems?
Well, problems come in a lot of categories. Everything from not having adequate manpower to not doing a test right. But I mean, those are distinct problems. But in many cases, they were technical details. So in some cases, you're right. In some cases, it was not acknowledging and working interfaces that were complex. If you put something on a spacecraft, size, weight, thermal performance, power, all of those things and more have to be worked, and you're not doing that in a vacuum. But even if you're just putting something on a satellite that's broadcasting a signal that then a user has to receive, the interface is out there in the ether. It's the radio signal. And you say, well, what's so complicated about that? Well, it is very complicated. And it turned out that when I sold the program, it was basically a set of 100 view graphs. It was a little more than that because we had done some testing of certain things, but it was basically a stack of view graphs. And that's fine. That's the way things get done. But once you dig into it, for example, the signal structure, it was very, very complex. And now it's the standard, and not just for GPS. Galileo, the European system, uses the same concept, the same signal, very, very similar. Even the Chinese do. I mean, you can see people in everyday life that, can't anticipate the turn on the street. I mean, it's, and maybe it can be trained, I don't know. But I do know that some people are inherently much better than that. And so they're picking up on tiny cues, just little subtle things that are suddenly smelling wrong. And then the consequence of that is they set priorities different. They say our priority has to be to work on this test, or we have to double up here, or I have to be more conservative when I design this transistor for the power. I've got to derate it more. I've got to have a more powerful transistor that I know can handle the excursions. I mean, there's all of these suddenly get together. And then there's kind of an element also, if you have a really good team, there's an element of trust that inculcates all of them. The trust is that the other team members are pulling their load. I mean, it's like combat. If you read the details of the Battle of Iwo Jima, which is something that I have read at least 5 different accounts of, if you read those details, you realize that somewhere in that team building was a trust between the members of those individual squads and platoons that was absolutely essential to what they were doing. Well, I'll tell you, building GPS was no different.
That last set of comments led us right into a conversation about a team and teamwork, which I really resonated with. We did a large study, and many of them, and one of the largest studies we did was about how you lead teams on projects just like this. And what we found was a fascinating finding about client results and monetary outcomes. And what we found is you can take a team that has poor morale and move them in various ways to good morale, and your results in both cases will go up. But then you take a good morale team and you shift it upward to a sense of camaraderie generally among the team, that I like working and enjoy working with these people. Results will go up again. Here's what was really interesting to me, and you're going to hear it more, and you heard it from him already a little bit, which is that if you take a team that has this enjoyment for each other, this camaraderie, and you can move it up to an esprit de corps where each member has a spirit of the larger team, and that the larger team has a positive spirit about each individual, and that each individual feels that way about each other. It creates a loyalty and I've got your back type of esprit de corps that you hear in very close quarter, very intense situations. And when you can move even a business team up to that highest level, your results soar. Love his comments on this.
What would happen on Fridays is we'd go down. It turns out the officers club was right sort of below us in the building we were in. And, working hours generally were nominally to 4:30 or 5. Well, about 6, the gang would start to gather. And it wasn't a big drunken brawl. Not even close. And so my spouse at the time, I said, hey, come on Friday. But what you're going to see is a bunch of people interacting on technical things that they couldn't do during the week, and the whole team will be down there. There'd be 25 of my guys all down there, telling jokes, having a good time, but also conducting a lot of business. And it was a good way to catch up on things that you did have priority to do.
I wondered if it was this type of openness that they forged within the office that set things in serious motion.
That's certainly part of it. Let me give you one example. I had a major, my name is Mel Birnbaum, and he was an outstanding system engineer. Very intense, very focused, tend to be so focused at times he'd ruffle feathers a little bit. But once the rest of the team came to understand the massive contribution he was making, it was okay. He could get away with it. And we'd have a meeting, and and some issue came up, and I made a decision. And if Mel thought it was the wrong decision on technical basis, not because of his ego, he'd say, Colonel, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And he'd come in, and it was about 50-50 as whether he turned my head around. But we'd go in a quiet room, and he'd explain what his views were and why. And I was open to that. The whole team knew that I was always open. If I made a decision, we're all marching that way, fair enough. But if some team member desperately thinks that's the wrong decision, they can come in and see me. And it's more power to them. I consider that loyalty. It's questioning my decisions in a reasonable, rational way, to me, was loyalty. And I hope that all of them felt they could do that, and I think they did.
I knew that Dr. Parkinson had ran and been in bigger companies, different contexts too. And I asked him how he broke communication down there, and I loved his answer. Here it is.
Yeah, I've run big companies in that way, but let me think now. There is a creeping, and I've watched a couple of technical companies on whose board I've been. There is a tendency to substitute process for the thinking and interaction I'm talking about. And the issue is not that you don't need process. The issue is striking the right balance. If the whole thing is process-driven, to the point that people are no longer really responsible for the decisions, they're just following this process, you have a disaster on your hands, because some things are not amenable to that. In other words, in some cases, people go through the process, but they miss the whole point.
We continued on. We talked about more collaboration issues. We talked about people, purpose, and process, and more of that, and weighing those. Listen to what he says here.
They lose sight of why the process was there. They're just following the process, and I have seen that. I've run, fairly large companies. I guess it was about 250, 300 million a year. It was pretty big, and it turned out it was really screwed up, and GPS was a joy. It was problems all over the place, but in this case, I was having to turn a ship that was heading the wrong way. And I'll tell you that just getting people used to the fact that we we are object-oriented and we're one team. And I go around with my forefinger in the air. I walk the halls, one team. We're one team. And I don't know, the stock turned around like crazy, and that company, I guess, around $2 billion a year now. I'm feeling a lot better about it.
I loved his response to talking about collaboration and how he really got it to happen. And he talks about the power of the purpose of the various teams working together, even cross-functionally. Instead of a management forced, I'm going to place you like this in the office so you work together, or we're going to split up the remote time and the in-office time, and we're going to structurally change everything from my position. He just expected people to get stuff done, and he expected them to use their very most human differentiator, flexible cooperation. He expected cooperation on his team, or you were out.
The four-star general who ran all the research and development in the whole Air Force came down to my program. And my program office wasn't very large. It was, I would guess it's 30 or 40 Air Force officers and probably 25 or 30 aerospace technical people augmenting us. Bill Evans, four-star general in charge of Air Force Systems Command. But at any rate, he was a friend of the program. I knew he had never been to the program office because we were in L.A., but he was in Washington area. And I briefed him every month, and he was a sharp guy. I enjoy sharp guys. I could tell you a little side story on an interaction that occurred that was sort of amusing. But he came into the program office, and he had two questions. And the first question is, where is everybody? And I said, well, we're running a program, and almost all my people are part of integrated product teams that are down reviewing, working on test results, or elbow to elbow with the people putting this thing together. And that was absolutely the case. I would have called an integrated product team because that came into the vernacular actually after we had already used it. In other words, we'd go into meetings, and at the meeting you spoke from your competence, not from your position. I don't care who you were, you got to speak if you had something reasonable to say. And if you didn't, frankly, if that happened repeatedly, you kind of get hooted out. But the point is that the integrated product team, when we went down to contractors, which we did very often and almost on a daily basis, we would be interacting with them. And it was not you and I and we, it was us, all of us. And we would go through a review, and it was, if there's a problem, first of all, it's going to see the light of day. We're going to expose it entirely. There's no protective culture here. And if there's going to be a solution, the whole product team is going to come to bear on it. And it's to your point. I don't know if it's collective leadership or collective problem solving. There was no question that I was a leader. I didn't have any issues like that, but I didn't need any. I was secure in my position. And if someone came up with a good thing, a good comment, a good observation, or a good question, I was into it.
I wondered if Dr. Parkinson really drove this cross-collaboration outside the organization, the other people, the other organizations they had to work with in an ecosystem to make this happen. Listen to what he says.
To me, it is collective competence and collective problem solving, which is focused more on what I'm trying to do than the act of doing it. I completely agree with where you're going. It's collective competency and an internal recognition of that collective competency. And by that I mean the mutual respect that goes with a good team, that you'll listen to everyone, whether he's a private or a colonel. You know, if they are competent, and by the way, it quickly comes out. I remember we had some contractors. We get into these deep interactions. Sometimes our meetings will last 16 hours, for heaven's sake. And the reason was we were delving down. But the contractors themselves, they knew if they tried to put forward someone working in a given area who was not competent in that area, that would be revealed very, very fast. We had something that we pioneered. It was called an award fee. And it was an amount of extra profit that I could give based not on capricious standards, but based on a little fuzziness. It was not quantifiable. But I called the program managers, all of the contractor program managers in, and I said, look, I want you to know how I'm going to use this. I'm not going to quantify it for you. What I'm going to tell you is I expect you to put your very best people in your company on my program. I don't care about your other programs. I absolutely don't care a bit about them. And don't moan to me. And once you get a good person trained and skilled on my project, I expect him to stay on that project till the end of it. And if you don't do that, you're going to read about it because I'm not going to send you this extra money. And since then, this has morphed into a deal where everyone, they do still have award fees, but it's automatic. Everyone gets 90 to 100%. Well, I didn't get that with me. I was using it as a lever to ensure the competence of my problem-solving team, and that was very important.
If I'm honest, this next set of ideas are really where Dr. Parkinson changed how I lead and how I consult with leaders. He changed my paradigm from big complicated systems, full books, lots of reports, to realizing that you're really on a path. You are at a current location. Your teams, all of them, 5, 10, the major divisions, the departments, or even just specialists, or even your own responsibilities are in the 5 usual areas of business. They each have their own unique contribution for that quarter. However, they have to work together to make a large leap this year. And then he talks about a vision that's even more of a destination that is going to take years, and he kept them focused. Think about how that relates to the GPS path that you look at every single day. My current location. I've got a milestone up ahead there. I'm going to head there. Then we're going to head to the next one. Then we're going to go beyond something that we've ever seen before, and we're going to go to an exciting destination. It's such an elegant leadership approach that I adopted and see all the findings we've had through that framework when I do consulting. Use it for your company. It's amazing.
That was the second thing that General Evans asked about when he came in. What was this sign? If you entered our area, there was a sign over the door that I had devised and put up there. And it said, the mission of this program office is to drop 5 bombs in the same hole and build a cheap set that will navigate 2 separate objectives.
I asked him to dig in a little deeper on the vision portion of it and relate the two, compare them. This is amazing information for a leader.
By that, I meant that we had to have the precision and accuracy such that we could become a humanitarian weapon system, that we weren't hitting hospitals or anything like that, which was our fundamental military purpose. The second thing is we needed to be able to build cheap GPS sets that could navigate. Because eventually the mass market, the civilian use, which was in there from the beginning, contrary to some histories, that use would be foiled if you could not make the set cheap. Now, at the time, cheap, in the early days, the military sets cost $250,000 each. And when I said cheap, I said I want to see it less than $10,000. Of course, today in your cell phone, you've got a chip that costs $1.50 and is 100 times more competent than anything we ever built. Either that, or it has even greater returns than you realize. I don't know. You could look at it either way. Yeah. Well, anyway, those are the 2 points.
One of the other impacts that Dr. Parkinson's interview has had on me is really incredible. Like I drive around every day, going to meetings, going to places, going to work, coming home, and I'm always using the GPS. And I'm looking at those paths with milestones, with a location and a destination, and I'm using it. It's so innate to us. It's literally the most innate thing that most organisms have. At least all the mammals, all the people and all the things that crawl on this earth. They seek a target, they pursue it with milestones, they look for pivots, they avoid those obstacles, and they get to the destination. It's what we're great at. So as I watch that, and I do that with help because I'm going somewhere I haven't been before, and I can see him getting me to this vision, this destination that I've never seen before, that is real. I think about leadership. Every time I use my GPS now, I'm thinking about leadership and those different time milestones. My proximity right now, we've covered that in goal setting. The different 5 to 10 specialist teams or divisions and their single most important priority, their objectives. Where we're all going to take a big leap forward and how we're going to hold up a finger and say, one team, one objective right now. And then we're going to tell them and warn them and present and embed in their minds a vision, the destination, and keep them on track and keep them making decisions that don't just let us get to our mission that we're on right now for the immediate customers, but allow us to get to a destination where we take future clients. What an example. I had to know and I had to ask, what did the government think? What did the science community think about this project? What do they still think about it? This ROI will blow your mind. Listen carefully to the ROI, the investment and the return, and the return on investment. Listen to this.
There's a 2-volume series that the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics has published that I was one of the 2 principal editors on and wrote a bunch of the chapters. It includes a chapter on the history. And secondly, there was the International Astronautics Federation, which is all the spacecraft in the world. There's delegations to this thing from every company, virtually every country in the world. And they had decided to, they had a big, I think it was 50th or 60th anniversary, and they held a meeting in Cape Town. And they said, we're going to run a contest and ask which space system has most affected humanity. It turned out GPS won. And the guy who announced the award says it wasn't even close. Well, I'm kind of amazed, but on the other hand, maybe it was a good write-up. The recommendation for GPS winning the award was not done by me. It was done actually by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I don't know if you know this organization, but they're the, in terms of professional space and aerospace organizations, they are the United States' preeminent organization and the world's for that matter. But the point is, they wrote that up.
After these past few sections of our conversation, I had to just know. I just asked him, Dr. Parkinson, I have personally so much value from your work every single day for decades now. And all the people I know nearly daily gain from your work on those teams and your orchestration of this technology. And the way you've laid it out is so amazing to this point. I can't wait for more. But before we continue, we hear more story, more details, I just want to tell you that you mapped all of our research. You just did so many things right. And my philosophy is obviously biased towards all the research we've done. And what we found is if you create an amazing outcome, an ideal outcome if possible, for the ideal person that your teams are designed and created capability to serve best with all those differentiators, even if it's 1 or 2 differentiators. If you're providing the perfect, the precise, the ideal outcome that those people have come to you for, then that's going to be very valuable and you're going to make money. And so as long as you keep those 2 priorities straight, ideal outcome for ideal customers, and then the money, over the long run, good things happen. But if you flip them and you go backwards, it's great short term for individuals. It's not great for everyone, and it's not great long term. So I asked him, what's your philosophy for leadership? He had an interesting answer.
I'm not certain as a matter of fact, I'm pretty darn certain there's a lot of people in the world that are never going to be good leaders.
Yeah.
And you both have to have a background, some instincts, and I think some scar tissue. I think having gone through and had some failures, and I've had some, that you learn to appreciate, or you gain greater skill, just like anything else you practice, I guess. But I can tell you my experience, the tough part I had, I founded a short course at Stanford on managing innovation. And I had quite a bit of experience. I had GPS. I had done some other things with companies, la-di-da. So I and another professor from the School of Business founded this 2.5, 3-day course. And what I had expected was we're going to have a bunch of people who are inherently innovators, who have a lot of ideas, a fair degree of creativity. They're going to come in, and we're going to help them organize for success. And, of course, business success can be defined in ways that you would understand. And so comes the first class, and I'm sitting up there talking, and reading body language, and I look at the first row, and there's about 6 guys who, with their hand posture and everything else, it looked like somebody had sent them to 5th grade or something. And those people, it turned out, were a problem in the whole class. And the reason is, I think their company, a large Fortune 500 company, had realized that the company needed innovation. And they had sent these people there to become innovative managers. Well, the truth be known, those 6 guys, and I'm generalizing here, maybe one of them could have made the cut, but they didn't have an innovative bone in their body. I mean, that isn't where they came from. And the corporation that they were sent from, and I kind of knew who it was at the time. I forget who it was now, but I knew it, and I recognized it as sort of an old-school, stodgy company. And in many cases, they have done what I call bred rats. I mean, it was astonishing. And the point I'm making is it's just like that in a corporation. And the reason it is that if from the top they are breeding rats, they'll get rats. And there has to be a massive program to switch them back. And so the point I'm making is, in terms of that selection evolutionary process and all the rest, you have to be very, very careful, because if you end up, these 6 guys sitting in the front row, they weren't in 2.5 days going to convert. That wasn't going to happen. And so it was a revelation to me, because I didn't think that was going to be the feedstock for this particular approach.
I picked up on his mention of leadership and innovation and combining those two, and his experience in his workshop. And I related a story that was really interesting. It was one of many, but it was one that I've noticed and remembered because of the circumstances. And I was in a downtown area, and I was going to my workshop, and I was leading the whole day. Maybe it was a 2-day innovation workshop. Might have been 1 day, but it was at least that long. And I went up to the front of the room to get ready, and there was a gentleman at the front of the room, and he was there early, and he was looking ready. And he was a nice person, and I asked him, so what did you bring to work on? Because in my workshops, we don't sit around and talk or listen. We go out into the world. We talk to real customers, real potential partners, real people that have perspectives, real employees, things like that. There are a few exercises we do. We were about to spend a whole day being creative, putting a pile of 100 ideas together, 100 improvements together, so we could pick just 2. And they are never the same as when people start the workshop. And yet I go up to the front of the room, this gentleman, I ask him, so what did you bring to work on? And he goes, Project X. And I said, well, what are your thoughts about approaching this? And he goes, well, I already know what I want to do. I thought we'd misunderstood each other. So I said, well, that's great. So I hope you get a lot of new ideas today. He goes, well, I don't need any new ideas. I know what I want to do. I'm just going to work on it today. And he did. He didn't listen to a thing. He didn't cooperate. He didn't go do the exercises. And it just shows what Brad was talking about. And he was in a place that he was breeding rats. So, I wanted to hear next from Dr. Parkinson some murkiness that I had run into. I'd done a lot of research. There's so much technology and so many projects and people and countries and things like that. I just wasn't clear who actually won this race, if he did for sure. So I just asked him point blank, did you win the race? And wait till you hear his answer.
We overwhelmingly won. We blew them out of the water. But we had started earlier. But by 1982, I think they may have launched their first satellite about 4 years behind us. But and if you go into some of my talks, and maybe in the history I've got this written up, there's a lot of parameters for a satellite system. It's got to do its performance right, and it's got to be, if you're building them, they can't be too expensive for each one. But there's one parameter that people sometimes lose track of. But as soon as I tell you what it is, you'll say, oh, I get it. And that is the burned out light bulb problem. That is the fact that the satellite, the longer, so here's the mental thing. Very simple math. Constellation is nominally 24, 30 or more, but that's fine. Nominally 24. So, if the satellites last 12 years each, on the average, I need 2 a year. If the satellites last 2 years each, on the average, I need 12 a year. Well, it turns out the United States record on this, and incidentally, by phase one, we were close to 10 years life. But now we've had satellites last over 20 years. 20 years up there pumping away. The Russians, by contrast, have struggled, and my guess is their mean average, and it's getting better, has been 2 or 3 years. And that is a tribute to American engineering. And as a matter of fact, as I understand it, their early satellites, and maybe until quite recently, could not withstand the vacuum and problems of space, so they traded launcher capability for that and put those components in a hermetically sealed chamber rather than what we do, which is, you expose them to the vacuum of space, but you design them to do that. But you can sense right away you're carrying a lot of baggage with a big hermetically sealed one atmosphere container of some kind. And I think they've come off that now, but there's the new European system has also had some very severe threats in terms of their clock failures that have been well publicized. And I'm very sorry to see that, because I want to see that European system up too. I'm a navigation positioning person, not a GPS person. And if that's your goal in life, then you want to see our cell phones and cars and surveying equipment and everything else have the ability to use as many satellites as possible. The redundancy will improve the accuracy, it'll improve the integrity, and it'll improve the availability. And those are things that we really need. So I gave you a couple longer answers.
At this point, I was so fascinated by all his leadership ideas and some of his execution and philosophy that I wanted to just back up and go back to the chronological story, the experience he had lived, he had executed with his orchestration of these great teams. And so I asked him to back up, and I said, When was the first moment of crescendo that you really started to sense a eureka moment? We can probably pull this off. And I asked him what that moment was.
Well, that moment was probably the successful launch and orbiting of the first satellite. I was the launch commander at Vandenberg. And once we launched it, we then had to fly from Vandenberg, which is right near where I live now, San Luis Obispo. We had to fly up to Sunnyvale, which was the satellite control facility, and then watch as the initial launch. The orbit had to be there had to be a perigee burn, a second thrusting, if you will, to get it into its final orbit, and then you had to deploy all the systems to make certain they worked. And so the success was not a single eureka moment. It was a series of, yeah, it launched. We didn't throw it in the ocean. And yeah, the burn worked. And yeah, the solar arrays deployed. And yeah, we can get the high power amplifiers on. And yeah, the clocks are working. And finally, at a cumulative of, it probably took us several weeks, you have this sigh of relief that you have successfully run this gauntlet of possible problems, because, you know, without the satellites to demonstrate it, clear we didn't have anything. So I don't know if it was a eureka moment so much as a relief moment that it all came together. It turns out in the initial satellites, the only one that didn't achieve success had a launch failure, and it got dumped in a canyon somewhere down at Vandenberg, I think. But that was after my watch. But what we had done to save money, the interesting sidelight, at the time, because of some nuclear disarmament treaties and all, we had a whole bunch of old liquid-fueled Atlas F ICBMs. And so we refurbished those and used those as our space launchers. And the consequence was a very inexpensive boost into space. Today, a boost into space probably costs 20 or 30 times as much as what we pay.
Wow.
Yeah, enormous difference. And there's no more options like that. I think we used our last Atlas F probably 20 years ago.
As we started talking about handhelds and the technology on our phones, my mind obviously came back to an interview I did early in this podcast. You can go way back in this podcast. Forgive my production. It's a similar phone interview back in the day of Marty Cooper, the inventor of the cell phone. And they live in the same state. They're similar generation of technology. And so I just had to ask him if he knew Marty Cooper.
No, I haven't, but he's another Marconi Award winner.
I didn't really know how to ask this next question, but the discussion about Dr. Marty Cooper and his accomplishments and the amazing ROI that he contributed not only to our lives, but to our financial statements as a company, so to speak, that I just had to ask him, you know, if you consider all that Marty accomplished and you consider all that you accomplished, Dr. Parkinson, don't you think that more than the government and the science community should just know your names as household names? And yet no one I've talked to knows their names. They've been on 60 Minutes. They've been awarded all the big awards, the pair, and yet they're not Taylor Swift. They are not someone that we know about like Bill Gates was and is. And I asked him about that.
I'm not certain it has. And you know, people in my position have a tendency to think they're going to somehow get immortality with this publicity. Not happening. It's not happening. I just got back from Spain and I saw all those aqueducts. There was some Roman engineer 2,000 years ago who deserves immortality, and we don't know who the hell he is. So just forget that right now. But to the extent that lessons are derived from it, I think it's a noble thing to do. However, I do not characterize myself as the inventor.
Yeah.
I think that there was a discoverer, the pair of discoverers discovered 12 techniques, and we picked one of those But the real thing that perhaps I did was I led the architecture of what it was going to be, led the selling of it, led the development of it, and led the testing of it.
Finally, I had to thank Dr. Brad Parkinson, and I thank him yet again here. Thank you, Dr. Brad Parkinson, for the trips you make easier, the clients I'm able to find, traveling the United States, mostly by car because you can do so much work on the way when you're doing work like this, and this amazing transformation of how I see leadership. It's a path with my current location, my proximity, as we talked about in the goal episode, and milestones to a real vision that I will actually bring clients to and arrive at. Thank you, Brad Parkinson. And by the way, thank you for making me safer on airplanes. Thank you for making me get cheaper airline tickets because of the fuel efficiency. Thank you for all the millions of things that GPS is literally used for now. If you haven't gone to those Stanford and Googles, look at the show notes, those speeches, and you'll find out shocking surprises about how much this project has affected. I did go on a little bit long with him, like this, thanking him for so much, including the $80 billion a year he contributed with this leadership that's hard money to the United States economy when it only costs us $2 billion to keep it up each year. That's an ROI anyone would take. Thank you, Dr. Brad Parkinson, for all that you've done for us. This is a moment not to let these ideas rush past. If anything created clarity or pointed to a change in your daily life, the premium action plan that we're going to do next will turn it into one small step this week. If you're not a member of the Bold Encounters Club yet, you can join at boldencounters.tv. You can even just try it. Or you can go click the premium version of this episode on the platform that you prefer to use. If you are a member, you're set. But remember, please, give access to someone else who needs to improve their life's work at boldencounters.tv. Either way, we'll begin the premium action plan next for members. Okay, let's start this premium action plan. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to first summarize the very few of 100 ideas that we heard from Dr. Brad Parkinson that relate to improving your work substantially on your own, with partners, with whole organization. But we're also going to narrow in on you and your week. And we're going to find one baby step, one goal, as we learned last week, for this week as an individual that would improve your own work within a cooperative setting. So, first of all, Dr. Parkinson, when he led those teams, he created a clear, highlighted, and bold path with the right milestones. Superior milestones to most leaders. And so the right path with superior milestones is the first overarching theme that you should remember. Second, he was precise. He wasn't just interested in a target for individuals and teams in the whole organization. He was interested in bullseyes, in precision across and throughout the organization on every single task. Because when you're doing what they had to do, there was no room for error. So, better path, better milestones, and precision, bullseyes, not just targets, specific actions as milestones with that bullseye precision. So first of all, he talked about the mission that they'd been called to achieve. And he got very concrete and very precise about it. The previous team had done simulations and worked on up to 12 theories of how this could happen. And his team got together and he would walk around, he posted a sign, and he said, our mission, our first mission is together, has 5 teams, to land 5 rockets in the same hole in the same desert. They will have no other navigation except for our new system, and we will prove that our system has worked. Precision, literally. Then he talked about something more. When he presented the second time to that team, he started talking about a vision that they had. And they had a vision for a handheld device in every citizen's hand There was almost like a utility for finding the people and places you needed to. And this navigation handheld utility was a very specific vision. He talked about the citizens not only of the United States, but citizens of the entire world getting it for free because of all the revenue it generated for the country. And so he was super specific about a future reality. And that was a very bold vision before the invention of smartphones. The next thing that you may have noticed is that he had these teams organized in a way that they had their own objectives, and yet he walked around not only other companies, but this team's halls saying, we are one team, and he would continually put them together in conversation of all types and say, you're one team, because everything had to be coordinated and everything had to be integrated throughout this system, the space, ground, the users, the engineering, the testing in reality. All these things had to work in these 5 different teams across the board. So they had to work together, but they all had their own contribution as a team. And then he talked about how individuals had to have the right skills. They had to be able to keep up. They had to have the speed and the skill, but they had to open up and talk. They had to constantly communicate, because it was no good to have an individual success if it didn't resonate and integrate with the entire system perfectly. So each person had to have their own goals and cooperate with other people. Now, he would facilitate their own goals by bringing them to the officers' club. Everyone was invited to the mess hall, and they would not have a drunken brawl, as he said, but they would talk business. They would talk project. They even invited their spouses, who apparently got bored because they were doing business and talking projects. And individuals were allowed socially, not allowed, but they felt socially they could cross boundaries of teams. They could go up a level in rank. They could talk to whoever they want as a person in that more social setting without all of the structure of an organization. And so they got to be able to be individuals and go get help and discuss problems and the like. So individual goal setting was critical in that way. Now, one of the things that you may have heard is how intent he was on delivering for the government what they wanted. But he also talked about the end users, these citizens, and what they would be able to gain from that. He was very focused on the end users, very focused on users in general, and that is the purpose of any company, any project, or any piece of work. The other people that you're actually trying to serve, the other people whose life and job you're trying to improve, is what he was all about. And so he had a very bold purpose. We are going to help every citizen of every country, and it's going to be free of charge. I don't know that you can get much more bold than that for a purpose. So what am I going to suggest that you do this week as your weekly goal, this challenge to take a baby step to use some of the interview that you just heard? This is what I would suggest. I would suggest finding 15 minutes for yourself each of the next business days. Just plan to go to work early, sit in the parking lot. If you work from home, plan to go on a drive down the street and park for 15 minutes. And you can go to a park, you can do whatever you want. You can schedule a conference room for all I care. But find a place in solitude and do the following. The first day, look out. The end in mind, as Stephen Covey used to say, like Dr. Brad Parkinson, look at your bold vision and think about what would be both aggressive in an appropriate way, be able to be clear like bold text is, and be highlighted like bold text is. And that's why we're going to use bold a lot in this week plan, because a bold vision, what is it that you want to do in 5 years for other people? And I would start there. And then I would go to the path, and I would start coming back towards time zero, where you are alone right now in your personal space, as we talked about in the goal setting episode a couple of episodes ago. And this path is about the people that you are most likely to be able to help. What are your talents? What is your network? What is your team? Whoever it is you're going to cooperate with, what is it that you are designed to do, and who could that benefit most specifically? And then you start thinking about this in your first in that session. You start thinking about what is the outcome that they want. So the first day you're thinking about what should we do in the future for them generally, because they're going to be different and their needs will be different. And what is the vision we want that is that reality that's going to come true? And then you're going to back to the path and you're going to look all the way up and down. You're going to think, where am I going to find the perfect individual? Who is the perfect individual for me and my people to cooperate and make a difference for? So that would be the second day. The third day, you're going to go to the mission. You're going to go to what Brad talked about with his 5 rockets in a much smaller way, most likely. You're going to say, okay, what is the big leap that I could take with some of these people and actually accomplish maybe in a year? And just think about these. Now, as I'm describing these, this is a big strategic planning, and so I'm not suggesting that it can be done in 1 hour over 15-minute increments during a week. What I'm saying is just start thinking about these things. Most people don't think about these things. They don't see the destination. They don't consider the path between them and their selves in their current location and in time zero in their proximate space. And you need to think about that. And so then you got to think about the milestones and this mission, this bold mission, this big leap forward. It's going to take more than you again. And so what is that? If you're going to accomplish that vision, what is a big chunk of it that should come first and should be this year? And just start thinking about that. You don't have to decide. You're going to have to socialize this and talk about it and consider it, but get these thoughts going through your head. Then the next day, what I would suggest is thinking about all those teams that you're going to rely on and the people that you're going to rely on, and what specific areas. There's going to be at least 5, maybe 10, and start thinking about the pieces and the people that are involved with those pieces, and think, what are those 5 objectives, those bold objectives that each area has to accomplish in order for this thing to work, for me to make a difference in the lives and jobs of people that I've considered. And just start thinking those thoughts. You are not going to be able to write it all down and detail it and do a big strategy session in 15 minutes. But for this week, let's just start thinking about that and considering that question. What are the team objectives specifically for each of the 5 or 10? I'd start with 5. And if you're wondering what the areas were, just consider the big main ones, like what are you going to do sales and marketing wise? How are you going to deliver something? How are you going to ensure customer success? Who's going to do the accounting? Who are going to be the leaders and worry about the people? Some of those big 5 departments or specialties that exist in every business, you can extend it to the 10 that are most often in big companies. You can just Google that or chat GPT it, but don't try to decide on all of it. Just start letting it go through your head. Don't let it stress you out. Just get creative. Know that creativity is messy and takes time. And so let it run through your head. And then finally, there is the individual goal. Your location, your proximate space, where you are right now, looking forward through those milestones to that vision that's the destination, where those people are better off and you're there helping them in the future, in years. And you're going to look through that year that's next closest to you, and you're going to look through those teams and some of those considerations, and then you're going to come back to your location and you're going to think about, what is the one baby step? What is the tiniest thing I could do this week and accomplish it to get towards that direction, to get towards that destination? And I'll tell you the secret. Even if you consider all these things and don't even decide them this week, but you have considered them, you have made a step in becoming a visionary leader for your own work or your organization's work. And you've discovered some of the challenges and keys to human cooperation. And that's a big accomplishment. These are things, I promise, because I've done the research, these are things that most don't even consider. It's very rare that people consider all these things. And so that is a great accomplishment in and of itself. Now, if you can figure out a goal for this week, for you to take a baby step towards this path's destination, then you really have accomplished a magnificent goal this week, just for yourself. So thanks for joining me on this premium action plan. Best wishes. I'd love to hear how you do on this. And this is going to be the framework for the upcoming series we're going to do on this strategy, this foundational philosophy that one can adopt, how one leads their own work or leads an organization, because they're really the critical actions involved with human cooperation. See you next time. Thanks for joining us today. Even great leaders get stuck. Others thrive. I'm Mark Cook, New York Times bestselling author, president of Windfall Partners. We get leaders unstuck and thriving with their teams. Clients upgrade leaders' retreats and conferences with my 5-star keynotes and breakouts on leaders' bold encounters. Also, leaders get weekly consulting as they execute key steps. Plus, brief check-ins guarantee results, live or via Zoom. After turnarounds as chief executive and 9 global studies of 2 million award-winning leaders, I've coached 4,000 client wins at top brands with my approach in over 50 cities worldwide. My Bold Encounters is an advanced system for leading. First, powerful steps on a path forward. Second, problem-solving skills that beat obstacles fast. Leaders create revenue breakthroughs and clients see new profits. Now let's lead with Bold Encounters today.